But in the interest of this story, you need Riot to come out,
Maybe it depends on who the reader is.
If you're trying to hide a body, put it in manure.
Yeah. Oh my God. Well, that was one scene where I was like, yeah. For a little teaser, a little amuse-bouche for our listeners out there on what you can anticipate. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bookish, a casual book club. I'm Laura Yu. I'm here with my friends, Sylvia Lee and Kofi Adisa. And today we are going to be discussing a novel called Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. I brought this up to my friends here because I kept hearing about S.A. Cosby on Book Talk. So I wanted to not read it by myself. So I said, hey, you guys want to read this? So we're here to talk about that. I'm going to go to Sylvia first to tell us maybe a little bit about the author.
Yeah. So I had never heard of S.A. Cosby until Laura mentioned it and was like, hey, we should read him for our next episode. And when I looked it up, it was kind of like a thriller, crime fiction. So I was like, oh, yes, I love thriller. So let's do that. But when I read it, I was surprised because the writing style reminded me very much of like Raymond Chandler. And if, listeners have been with us for a while, we read James Crumley, who does a lot of this kind of hard-boiled detective fiction, but like with like these real rough, like almost toxically masculine characters. But the writing is kind of literary in a way. So it's kind of blending these crime fiction, which are a little bit more popular, and like literary fiction genres. And it was kind of like that sort of happy medium where the writing itself was actually really good, and so was the story. So I want to talk a little bit about that in a minute, but I also did a little bit of research on Cosby since I just had not been familiar with him. But a lot of his work takes place in the South, right? So like I think Southern Gothic crime fiction is a way to describe some of his work. And it's because he was born and raised in actually Matthews County, which he mentions in the book. There's like little Easter eggs there. And so he really talks about like county folk versus city folk, right? And in this book, that's like Matthews County versus like Richmond, right? The city folk who think they're kind of like highfalutin, right? But the county, and they look down on county folk as being a little country, but he himself is a county folk. He talks about how in 2017 he sold his first book to a very small publishing firm, but he was always kind of writing and interested in that, but it was sort of, he calls it a dream deferred, right? And he went to a mystery writers conference in Florida, and there he happened to meet an agent who said, hey, let's get in touch. So that agent works for the same publishing house as now like Oprah. And that was his big break. He said it changed his life forever. So yeah, he talks a lot about the types of characters he writes, which, are kind of these rough figures. And, he talks about how you don't have to like the character, but you do have to see, like, you can be interested in them, right? And I totally felt that because the two main characters in here, who are the fathers who are seeking like bloodlust, that's what it is. And it's vengeance for their murdered children who were married to each other. They're gay couple murdered in a very gruesome, horrific way. And the two dads are both ex-convicts, which says a lot right there. One who has a long history of very violent crime. And it kind of brings out like this almost like suppressed beast in them. And it's wrong. And like it gets very violent, very graphic. And yet you're like, yeah, like get them. Like it's just this weird.
You're cheering for them.
You're cheering for them. And I think that's why his writing is compelling to me, because it's like you kind of understand. At the same time, like with Crumley and even with Chandler, I would kind of roll my eyes after a while. I'd be like, okay, all right, everyone's a man, right? But in this one, the violence is a stand-in for something else, something softer, something a little bit more vulnerable, and you kind of get that sense from that. And it's also funny too. He's got these like hilarious lines, funny, that just kind of like make you laugh and keep going. So, I thought it was a really great read, fast read. Kofi, you have a furrowed contemplative brow.
Yeah, I always have a furrowed contemplative brow.
Tell us.
No, I think one of the things that we were debating initially was about doing something for Halloween. Yeah. I am so glad we didn't do something for Halloween because I think we've already done that. Yeah. And I also thought that this was a kind of genre that we've sort of worked with, but not really worked with. And as I said before we got on, I really thank Laura for introducing me to this cat. I never really read anything by him. And then I ended up ordering 3 books, 2 of which I picked up at my local Barnes and Nobles, and then the other one is going to get shipped to me. But I think that's the hallmark of a great book, the small g great writer, is that you want to read more of that person's work. It is well paced. I think the narration, it's centered on the people because it knew the people, right? It knows the people. It doesn't actually really take a side. It's sort of a weird third person, omniscient, limited kind of thing. But I think the interesting thing about the book was it wasn't so much who did it, because I think you kind of figure that out, but it's what is going to happen now that they know who did it. And then there's these different fashions. So you have the rare breed, which I think is a very interesting name for a biker gang, and Ike, who is one of the protagonists with Buddy Lee. And I struggled with whose story is it exactly? And if I go with the ending, I may say one thing, but then again, I might think of it another way. It's definitely a book that is guiding you to reconcile certain things about identity, sexual identity, and the politics behind that. What does it mean to be male or masculine? And what does it mean to fall in love or have this kind of unrequited love that the fathers had for their sons because they really weren't in their sons' lives. And there's this weight and this guilt because they weren't there to do what is stereotypical male roles of protecting their children. What ends up happening is, since they can't protect them in life, they're going to protect them in death. And so it becomes one of these books where, you're kind of rooting for the bad guy because there's really not too many good guys, which, is an interesting way how the ending is reconciled with that. But it is a really good book. I strongly recommend it. It may be like the second or third best book I read this season.
No.
Laura.
I did. I didn't have furrowed brows, but I found it so fascinating how at the same time it moves so fast, the plot, like every page, every chapter, like things were happening. I appreciate also short chapters. But there's so much character development in the way that the sentences are written. So when you read a sentence, like, I know there are quotation marks that's attributed to this character or that, but even without that you can tell that someone else is now speaking. Like I felt like that's such a good control over voice as he's writing in these different voices. So I read it while I was on vacation, and I just like sat in that chair and read it like in one day. And it was so good. It kept me engaged. And so like Kofi, I ordered another book by him. One thing that I thought was so unexpected, I don't know what made me choose this book. I didn't even read the like synopsis. I just picked it. I was like, Razorblade Tears. I don't know. So I picked it. And so I had no idea when I opened the first page what it was about. But this mix of racial tension between the 2 main characters as they are together dealing with their own prejudices about gender identity and, sexual orientation and those issues. So the way I think Cosby sort of, like intermingled that together, not only made the characters complicated, but then the other characters, like, which made me think like, he's bringing in a new character. Which part of the issue is this character going to be about? Is this guy about race? Is this guy about politics? Is this guy about crime or, gender identity? And when I read thrillers, I never see anything coming. I never see it.
I'm always predicting.
I'm always
it's
shocked.
definitely this guy.
I'm always shocked. And I think, so even with this, by the time I figured out who did it, I yelled out loud to the room. My family was in the room. I was like, oh my God, I know who it is. And then literally one paragraph later, they explained who it was. So I didn't figure it out any earlier than I was meant to figure it out, like one paragraph earlier. But anyway, I never see it coming. And I think partly it's because I don't wonder who did it. I just read. I just keep reading. I'm not actively ever thinking, who is it? Like, who did it? Or what's going on here? I don't know why that is. That same thing happens in movies too. I never see anything coming ever. But I knew one thing, this book, I knew what was going to happen to Buddy Lee.
Yeah.
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
We all,
It's
and that's the thing. I think it's also important to think about this happening in Virginia.
Yes.
You know, with these different tensions, and especially like Richmond. And its historical, I guess, ethos to the United States and what that means. It's not Monticello, but it's pretty close.
Yeah.
You know, it's this idea of the South and what the South meant in terms of men, even in terms of the music, the songs that they were listening to.
Yeah.
It was one of those, I wouldn't call it urban, simply because it felt more rural or rural. Sorry, my Ebonics got in the way. So it was rural. My wife loves when I say words because I always say them wrong. But yeah, it's in that vein where the county people are very, very different than the city people. And so you know, it's almost like the country mouse versus the city mouse, except the country mouse is pretty strong and violent.
Yes. I was just going to make the point that, I think it's a study, like what you were saying, both of you, it's a study in masculinity in the rural South. But, there's this line in the book, and I think it's Tangerine, or I forget who says, maybe Tex, someone says it, where he says, if you're a gay man in the South, and you can cook or do hair, nobody bothers you.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
But if you're neither one of those things, then you got to get the hell out of Dodge, basically. Yeah. Because then you're just very vulnerable and you're kind of like a target. And I thought that was interesting. And in the interview I read with Cosby, that he attributes that quote to a friend of his saying that, and how it was really frustrating for him to think about the conservative, like Bible Belt South and, how they were defining manhood and how that kind of collided with these other elements of like race, sexual identity and orientation, gender orientation. And even I noticed with almost like intellectual elitism too, like when people are talking and you think they sound so smart, they're the city folk, right? And they think the county folk are dumb. But it's the county folk who are the ones who are running, who get the last sort of thing. And they're the ones who figure things out that the cops either won't or can't. Yeah. So I really liked that. The other thing I liked about this, and at some point I get a sense of it, like both Ike and Buddy Lee, the two protagonists, the fathers, they have carefully, well, not so much Buddy Lee, but Ike, ever since he's come out of prison, he's really worked hard to rebuild his life, right? And everything is carefully cultivated. And even the fact that his profession is like lawn care and maintenance, right? He's cultivating something over time and he's built a successful business for himself. And seeing him basically at some point, there's a point of no return. He's just basically throwing all of this away. But you're just kind of like along the ride. It reminded me of Thelma and Louise, right? Of all things, which is like two women, right? And how after a certain point, it's like, well, there's only one way this is going to end, And it kind of, there was almost a sort of like desperate feel, right? Where they're just because they feel so much shame with how they treated their sons when they were alive. And they're in this like shame spiral and they're just going to freaking like see it through to the end, to their own self-destruction to a point. And it's really almost like moving in a way. And you feel, I don't know what it is. It's not pity, but you feel for them.
Yeah, which kind of goes back to the question of, whose story really is it? Because I would wonder, well, what is your take on how all of this started to come together was through Buddy Lee's actions. It is through his act that changes Ike or Isaac. He became on board. Yeah. His bloodlust increased only because of the act that
happened.
Buddy Lee created. Now that was not foreseeable.
No, I was actually surprised by that. I was like, oh. And like for readers out there, listeners who want to read this, Ike has an alter ego he calls Riot. And when Riot comes out, Riot is the one you don't want to come out. Like, he's the one who's gonna, like, he just wants violence, right? So when that is revealed, what Buddy Lee has done, I was mad. I was like, you piece of,
like, that's low.
Yeah, but, and I think, and Ike was mad, but also, like, he wasn't, you know? Like, I think he realized at that point, like, that was the excuse he needed.
But if Ike is still the hero, like, what part of the hero's journey would that put him in? Because I also think that his wife not objecting to what he's, like, by silently blessing, I guess.
Not even silent sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
She's like, she encourages him.
Yeah. So she's like, why not? Or what are you going to do? You know, she doesn't stop him. And I do think that it seemed to me that between the two of them, they have a dynamic where if she were against it and, you know, they had a that kind of relationship. But I felt like her sort of condoning even or encouraging was also a catalyst. So you're thinking about, like, I mean, I definitely read it as Ike's story, and these other characters have to help him along to bring out Riot, right? Which in one sense, like, as you're saying, you don't want him to come out, but in the interest of this story, you need Riot to come out, you know?
Maybe it depends on who the reader is.
If you're trying to hide a body, put it in manure.
Oh my God. Well, that was one scene where I was like, for a little teaser, a little amuse-bouche for our listeners out there on what you can anticipate. Okay, so here's the question. Laura mentioned that Jerry Bruckheimer actually bought the film option.
They're in development.
Okay.
Oh, so, I thought that was in relationship to what you said.
What?
In the text. I thought she was being funny.
No. And Laura, so curious, Laura, who would you cast? She was telling us a little story.
So when I was reading this, like, I was sitting with my sister-in-law, and she hasn't read the book, but I was telling her, like, hey, but she's a TV movie, like, fan. Okay. So I was like, hey, like, this book is about this. Like, what do you think? Who should we cast in this film? And then she and I had some names exchanged, and then she was like, let's ask ChatGPT. So now, like, the names are falling out of my head, but one of the first persons I thought was Idris Elba for Ike.
No, I thought Mahershala.
He was the second choice. Like, Susan and I thought about that, and then we were trying to think, like, exactly what age.
Idris is older now, though.
He's very gray.
He's got some gray now. You need someone grizzled.
I have the perfect person. But keep going. No, go on.
And then now I can't remember who it was for. What do you think?
Delroy Lindo.
He would be amazing.
And Ethan Hawke. Or actually Sam Elliott. Since Sam Elliott.
That would be hilarious.
It's kind of mentioned throughout.
Yeah, so Buddy Lee is repeatedly, it's like kind of like a joke. The different characters Buddy Lee Jenkins meets along the way repeatedly refers to him as, like, cheap, broke-ass Sam Elliott or Sam Elliott cop. Like, it's just like
Walmart Sam Elliott.
Who's this Walmart Sam Elliott? But it's like every single time.
So that would be hilarious. But Sam Elliott's way too old.
Yeah, that's the other thing. So that's what I said.
Way too old looking anyway. Like,
you need someone who's like kind of busted looking. But like was handsome.
I don't know about that. I was going to say, because the name that came into my mind and you say was handsome, he seems to be the same guy who was married briefly to Angelina Jolie.
Brad Pitt?
No.
Billy Bob?
Billy Bob Thornton.
That was my first thought. Billy Bob.
Billy Bob
for
Thornton.
Buddy Lee.
What was Buddy Lee's physical type again? I thought he was a little bit like
he said wiry, rangy.
Okay. Yeah, Billy Bob.
Yeah, Billy Bob Thornton.
Looks like a drunk who would live in his trailer.
Yeah,
he could pull that off.
Yeah. He could
even be a Walmart Sam Elliott.
Yes, he could. Yes, he could. He's for whatever reason,
I think
need
someone
big.
Burly. Yeah.
He's sort of somewhat burly. He's definitely tall. It couldn't be someone like Denzel Washington because then that just seems like, you're just going for the.
You can't get past that's Denzel Washington.
I
Part.
don't know. I think Denzel will be good at to be honest, because he's done a lot of these revenge things in the past,
this character.
Equalize. Like he just was on this like film kick with that, but I feel like this might be a good one to kind of blend his acting chops with like bloodlust. You know?
Yeah.
So Jerry Bruckheimer, if you're listening, which I'm sure you are, these are our suggestions. Okay?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, I have another question. So what about the women in the story?
Mm-hmm. I was
right?
thinking about that.
There's Ike's wife, the granddaughter,
the ex-wife,
and the ex-wife who shows up, Tangerine, right? And Buddy Lee's neighbor.
Margot.
Yeah. What did you make of their presence sort of in the perimeter of the main plot?
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I think Christine, the ex-wife, and Maya are kind of opposites of each other, you know, in terms of their relationships with their kids. And so that dynamic is interesting. I think the Christine character, who's Buddy Lee's ex-wife, you know, she's developed, but, you know, she's kind of static. Yeah. So there's some dynamism there towards sort of the middle end. But with Maya, you know, when we see her, she's this weeping person, but then you see this other side of her too that is like, yo, let's get them.
Yeah.
I mean, you go get them.
Yeah.
But, you know.
She's like, I'm kind of okay with you committing murder,
and you know, and
bring out Ryan.
Yeah. Right. Like, and, you know, it's there are tender moments between Maya and Ike that shows her levels of development. Margot, I don't think she's totally flat, but she's sort of like a semicircle. Yeah.
So why did we need Margot in that story?
That's a good question. But I think there was this other way of seeing white women that isn't so gold diggerish, because I guess Christine would be that. You know, she
like a foil to Christine.
Yeah. So
and it does tell us something else or something different about Buddy Lee's character.
It does. Yeah. And the fact that he did finally give her flowers. And that, you know, I think that creates that sort of arc for her a little bit. I think Tangerine is a story in herself. And I would love to see that develop, but it's, you know, that's not going to happen. Jazzy was another character that her dynamism was, even though it was a burst, it was really interesting. And you could tell a lot about her and her relationship with Marcus. Apparently, all you got to do is buy him a PlayStation or Call of Duty. Some crazy thing, and he'll be all right. But I think this was also a commentary on men.
Yes.
You know, and it wasn't just men are either grossly violent or somewhat, you know, unprincipled. They're just complicated, you know. And we see Derek and we see Isaiah through the eyes of these men who are ex-cons, you know. And I think that's what made it really enjoyable to see this dynamic. And the various places they went with the cakes and knocking over the cake pop, and then going to
the gay bar.
Going to the gay bar, you know.
Cheers, queers. I just burst out laughing because it was such a dichotomy. And then that's when Ike realizes, he's like, I think we're in a gay bar. And it just
and like he's figuring it out. But I think as the audience, we kind of figured it out.
We're like, clearly, as soon as it was called Garland.
And you see all
Judy Garland everywhere.
Thing. So in that, it's kind of hinting at a kind of campiness of gay culture.
Yeah.
And so I think the book does a really good job. Yeah. Like sometimes these books can go too campy. Like, okay, you're sort of being patronizing in a way.
Caricatures.
But it really wasn't.
Yeah. There was just enough where they were making fun of certain groups, right? Like he's making fun of like certain aspects of certain groups when they act a certain way, right? Like at the bakery or what is the other shop that's like a front for?
Like a cannabis shop.
Yeah, like it's a front for like extremist political.
Yeah, they're supposed to be a revolution.
But then it turns out they're like two like know nothing. So those were funny. They added these comedic, relief.
It puts like some two men who take themselves very seriously into positions where you really cannot. It's just comical, when you take yourself that seriously and you're in this completely like kind of ridiculous scenario. Yeah. And how that brings out their insecurities, but also the desperation that no matter what their prejudices may be or their homophobia or whatever it is, there's something else that trumps that, right? That like drives them forward even still, right? So these are people who Ike and Buddy Lee would never be caught dead with, like talking to or anything like that. But because they're driven by this goal, right, to find out who killed their sons, they're willing to do like all sorts of things and go into put themselves in all sorts of situations. And I thought that was so like, how far are they going to go?
Yeah.
Turns out they go all the way. Like, turns out they are willing to go very far off the cliff.
Yes.
But
very, very far.
Very far off the cliff. So I liked how their relationship developed over the course of the novel. So like the end, like I think realizes, I forget what the exact phrasing was, but he surprises himself that like he
called him a friend.
A friend.
Yes.
That's how he thinks of him now, as like a friend. And before they were just complete like, you know, we're just in this just to do this one thing and then let's go our separate ways.
It was definitely an odd couple.
It is.
Yeah.
It really is.
I especially found the militia and the bike people, the bikers. The bikers really were kind of like a bungling batch of people.
Yeah.
Like, you know.
It's like Roadhouse. That's what it reminded me of. Like, what is this, Roadhouse?
Yeah.
You know?
And I mean, it's a really good book, and I highly recommend it.
As we're unpacking it, I'm just remembering now just how many different people they meet and how many different places they go, right, as this is unfolding. And like the barbershop, for example, when Ike goes to see his
Slice.
Yeah, that's right. The barber, that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
It was interesting that the issue of homosexuality came up in the barbershop. If you've been to any black barbershop, which I'm not suggesting none of you have, but if you have, you would hear those kinds of conversations quite often. And there is those people who try to enlighten the unenlightened. And I thought that scene was really, really good. Now, you know, I'm not saying all barbershops are a front for drug activity, but I am saying that those types of conversations are natural in those spaces because I think the barbershop is a kind of fortress of solitude, especially in the African-American community. It's like the beauty salon for Black women. You can get all the latest tea.
So I think when the movie comes out, I think we need to, who knows how long this is going to take, obviously, but we should take a field trip.
We should.
We definitely should.
Another field trip to the movie theater.
Absolutely.
Do you know if in his other books, if he deals with, are they mostly about men, like in his handling of the characters, or?
I don't. He
curious.
does mention that is like a forethought of his mind because I think that's how he grew up. But I actually think it is the storyline. Like he said, he got into writing because when he was a child and like his mom used to read him fairy tales or whatever, he would always point out the plot holes in them. You know? He'd always point out the plot holes in the fairy tales. So his mom was like, "Why don't you just write your own?" So he started doing that. And so I think he really is interested in sort of like these murder mysteries and using that as the foreground to talk about some sort of socio-political topic or issue that has been like, you know, that's informed by the South, that takes place in the South.
Yeah.
And so I think masculinity is a big one.
Absolutely.
Yeah, of that. And also like the conservative politics as well. There's a lot of political undercurrent, overcurrent in his writing too. So yeah, for sure.
Well, we've certainly become fans. So Sylvia and I are planning to read All the Sinners Bleed, right? And Kofi's got
Blacktop Wasteland. I have all the sinners, but the Blacktop Wasteland is the book that precedes this one, and I kind of want to go back in order and everything and see what's the what. Yeah. Well, we've had a long conversation.
I know. This was fun.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah. Oh, I guess I'm closing. So, thank you for listening. And please tune in to our next episode of Bookish. You can get this podcast on any of your devices or any of the podcasts that you listen to. Until then, I am Kofi Adisa with Sylvia Lee and Laura Yu. Thank you for listening.
Bye.
See ya.